I told you how like I hadn't had a haircut because of the coronavirus. So it's just me.
Well, I want to welcome everybody. We are now live on the Vanderbilt.
I hadn't had a haircut because of the coronavirus.
Well, guys, thank you for joining us as usual on Thursday nights for our conversations with Commodores. And I'm so pleased to have Edie Johnston Kelsey from the Nashville area with us. Good evening. How are you, Edie?
I am good.
Good to see you.
Vanderbilt.
Well, I appreciate you spending a few minutes with us. And we've had coaches, we've had ball players, we've had managers and trainers, and now we finally have a cheerleader. And boy, do we have a great one with us. Maybe the #1 fan of Vanderbilt in the last, I don't know, 30 or plus years. But for those of you who don't know Edie, she cheered for the Doors in the 80s. She's been a lifelong fan. Somehow she convinced her entire family to convert from the orange to the black and gold. And we're going to get into some of that. But before we get into the history, if you would, Edie, just tell us a little bit about about your family now. What do you do? What's going on in your world?
Well, I am in Nashville. I grew up here and in 5th grade said I wanted to go to Vanderbilt, and kind of everybody told me I'd changed my mind, and went to Overton High School here in Nashville and then went to Vanderbilt, and then proceeded to marry a coach. And we moved to Montgomery, Alabama, and he coached at a small school called Faulkner University. It's in a school. 3 other people turned the job down, and all 3 were going to bring his in as an assistant. And then the president was like, I'm tired of interviewing. And they offered my husband Tom a job. So we were there for 5 years. We came back to Nashville for 1 year, and he coached with the legendary Don Meyer. That was his college coach at Lipscomb. And then we went to Murray State, and then proceeded to move to Tuscaloosa. So I told Bernard that I have the unique perspective of having lived in Tuscaloosa and Baton Rouge.
You sure have.
We were in Montgomery for 5 years, Tuscaloosa for 3. So it probably took me a good 4 years to understand Alabama, the obsessive football culture and the reverence for Bear Bryant. And once you get up the learning curve, you understand, you kind of have to experience that. Bernard, Vanderbilt needs to recruit in Alabama because Alabama and Vanderbilt play in the state of Alabama. Vanderbilt's like Harvard, they're like the gold standard. And those mamas want their, sons to, get their academic education. So, it's just interesting. That's a little unique of the states we lived in. But my husband had kidney cancer in 2000. Interesting. He was the 3rd coach in 4 years on the basketball staff, and the other 2 passed away. So it was a very hard time. The first coach was on the previous staff, and then Robert Scott, who is from Birmingham. He had stomach cancer, and my husband was having stomach problems. So they did a CAT scan and discovered his kidney cancer. The Alabama gymnastics coach had the same cancer. And it was Sarah Patterson's husband, and she's the gymnastics coach. She sat with me through the whole surgery and walked me through that. And so he took a year off, and a school in Atlanta, Greater Atlanta Christian School, which a lot of people may know about, GAC, if you're around Atlanta. Very athletic oriented. Their campus is like, unbelievable facilities. He coached there. And that's where I met Coach Kane, who was on Bobby Johnson's staff as the offensive coordinator. And he was recruiting this kid, Micah Andrews. And so I was trying to help Coach Kane with Micah. I actually first saw Coach Kane, but I would talk to him on the phone. And the day Micah committed to Wake Forest, Coach Kane, it's like his dog had died. And I look at my phone and go, finally, I have a Vanderbilt coach that cares as much as me about football. I'm sure, people have cared, but, he was a very good recruiter. And, there was a kid, I didn't know him very well. His name was Ben. I knew Ben really well. He played basketball, but he ends up signing with Wake Forest. And I would have talked Coach Kane into getting him at Vanderbilt, because he started for Wake Forest, and Wake came to Vanderbilt, and Ben had one of the touchdowns for Wake. So that was a little bit painful. I wanted him to be on the Vanderbilt side. But then my husband wanted to get back to coaching. So we moved to Jackson, Mississippi, which we were there for 7 years at Belhaven, which is an NAIA school. And, you know, I kind of went to Jackson kicking and screaming.
I bet.
You know, my friend Johnny Clark, which Bernard knows, he said, you know, you're going back 30 years in time, going to Jackson, because he said, you know, Nashville's 10 years behind Atlanta, Birmingham's 10 years behind Nashville, and Jackson's 10 years behind Birmingham. I was at a very countercultural school that I taught, St. Andrew's Episcopal, and, you know, Belhaven was really good to us. And it's very much like a small Vanderbilt where they really put the emphasis on other things besides athletics, but they wanted to be successful. And we were there 7 years. And then my husband got a call to be the, not the athletic director, the basketball operations at LSU. Mm-hmm. So we go to LSU, and then there was a coaching staff change. And I just said, I'm now 50 and we've moved around 15 times. And my husband says, who's counting? And I'm like, me. Yeah. I inside the cities, like we moved in one house in Baton Rouge we were renting, and then they sold that house and we moved to another house. So I said, I got to come home. You know, we looked at some other options, but there's no place like home. And part of the pull of my heart was there's Vanderbilt. Now, I didn't let a few hours stop me from coming to Vanderbilt games for the most part, but I do love that Vanderbilt's there. I'm actually not a season ticket holder, but I managed to go to all the games.
I was going to say, you don't miss many games.
No, I don't. And I thought about buying season tickets just because, you know, just for the support and everything. But, you know, so we're here. I have to give a shout out to Coach Mason, because usually games come down to the wire, and you know, even no Vanderbilt fan feels safe because we know all the heartaches that we've had. I give you this list. You know, Bernard and I were talking about the Alabama game when Zolman was the quarterback, and we came like, I don't know, this super close to beating them. I took that loss so hard, my husband wouldn't come for years to any Vanderbilt games with me. And so he literally, like the Wake Forest game that Ben played for Wake Forest, he dropped me off, went to the coffee shop, and came back for that game. And then he finally agreed to come to the Georgia game, that game where they kicked the 52-yard field goal. And he's like, no. But then he's coming back now. But Coach Mason, like, I've had some games where I've sat there and we have dominated and I could relax. And one of those games was the Tennessee game, you know, not this past season before. We just ran Tennessee up and down the field, and having been a native Nashvilleian and having all these Tennessee friends and colleagues, I teach at Brentwood High, and my friend next door has a big Tennessee thing on her door. And, you know, it's real hard not to be like, ho, 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 3 in a row, you know.
But you've been bucking that trend your whole life. I know that you had a grandparent who cheered in Knoxville. How did you, I want to hear about that, but how did you convert the family from orange to black and gold?
Well, I should first start with how I got to be a Vanderbilt fan. So, 1974, when Vanderbilt, I think it's 74, when Vanderbilt went to the Peach Bowl. Mm-hmm. Is that right, Bernard? You're kind of the history.
That's right. I think that's
around there, you know, 74, 75, I think 74. Mm-hmm. Hold on, Mike, give me the football. There was, you know, in Nashville, there was all this excitement about Vanderbilt. I was in elementary school, and they had these Converse shoes that they were Tennessee and Vanderbilt, and that was like the thing for all the kids in elementary school. You had to go to Kane Sloan's and go get these shoes. And so, like, in my elementary school, it was like the Converse, like, and I begged my parents to take me to go get these shoes. And I just wanted the Vanderbilt shoes. I don't know if it was the colors or what, but there's all this excitement in Nashville because we were going to the Peach Bowl, and, you know, I guess it was Coach Sloan, right? And so I got those shoes and I wore them proudly through my elementary school years. And in 5th grade, we had to write down our goals, and I wrote that I wanted to go to Vanderbilt. Actually, I wanted to be a Vanderbilt cheerleader. I mean, I wasn't in gymnastics or anything. I was a diver, but I actually tried out in 7th and 8th grade and didn't make cheerleading, so I wasn't off to a good start. um, and then my first 2 years of high school as a wrestling cheerleader because I was in the band.
I never knew they had wrestling cheerleaders.
Yes. That's one of my happy memories of high school. That was a lot of fun. And so I was in the band for 2 years. And then my junior year, we had football, basketball, wrestling, cheerleader. So I tried out for the football cheerleading and made it. And we won the state championship, which is a really great experience to go through, to win a state championship. It was when Tennessee only had 3 classifications. We went 14-0.
Wow.
And you know, I read the sports page every day. I got that from my grandmother. I even read the transactions in the sports page.
Wow.
And so there's my daughter, Brooklyn. I guess she's going outside. So, you know, I would follow Vanderbilt, but I wasn't really going to the games. But I had, you know, just they were on my radar. And then I liked the academic part of Vanderbilt. And so I actually didn't apply early decision. I'm not sure why, because I had set, but then I cheered football my junior and senior year. And I was a diver. So I dove like from time of like 9 years old to 18. So I kind of had that like sense of being up high and doing that. But the real thing that I was in the flag corps and that made my arms really strong and sharp. And then my next door neighbor was actually a Tennessee cheerleader. And he kind of taught me the stunts. But back to my grandfather, he went to Tennessee and I guess they called them yell leaders back then. But, you know, he, let's see, trying to think, maybe he's like in the 30s because my mom was born in 41. So she was the oldest of 4. So in the 30s, my grandfather was a cheerleader and went on to be an oral surgeon. So I just slowly, like, I think just, you know, it was Nashville and just my passion. And then my senior years when they went to the Hall of Fame Bowl. So that was another time when Nashville was really, I think Nashville gets behind when it's, you know, you have these long suffering times of being a Vanderbilt fan. And when I tell my LSU fan friends that I waited 26 years for a winning season, they can't even comprehend that. You know, and we came, you know, so close so often through the Woody years and everything. And, you know, we played Notre Dame toe to toe. You know, I was telling Bernard, Corey Chase is my favorite football player. I have a few others, and Jamie Graham, I think you said he's coming. He's one of my favorite. And Corey Chavis was out there for 2 games practically, and Notre Dame scores at the end. And a friend of mine, husband, is a radio guy in Knoxville, and he interviewed Corey after the game and tried to, off the record, try to get him to kind of disparage the offense because we just didn't have much offense in the Notre Dame game. And he goes, no, I let the team down. You know, that was me, the defense, you know, and this was like off the record. So ever since then, I've been like, you're a stand-up guy, Corey Chavis, you know.
Because that game particularly could have been very easy for the defense to say, you guys got inside the 5-yard line twice and did not, you know, didn't put it in the end zone. But I get what you're saying. I'm
looking at the football stadium back behind you. I can tell you where I was sitting at that Notre Dame game. I was like, I could see they were coming towards us, you know, and so you have this hope of we're going to score. Oh, no, Notre Dame's coming to score and trying to hold them. And of course, you know, that's still at the point where Notre Dame is like, if somebody's a football recruit, the title is they're being recruited by Notre Dame is like the anointing that they're, you know, the top of the food chain. So, you know, even though Notre Dame struggled a little bit, it was still, you know, and I also was at the Alabama game that we had to play without Jamie Winburn. Do you remember that game? And was it Jimmy Williams?
You got me there. Somebody who's watching may know. Dwayne Jones is on with us, June Jakes, OJ Fleming. If you guys remember that, chime in. Let's hear some comments from you.
Yeah. So the game in Birmingham, I know Jamie didn't get to play, and my husband's working at Alabama, wear my red and have my poker face on.
Boy, how'd you do that?
Oh, it was hard. And one of the assistant coaches was sitting behind me, and I know he was going to tattle on me. So I had to like really,
Yeah.
knew how I felt about Vanderbilt. But I mean, you can't help but be glad if Vanderbilt beats Alabama, because we beat them my sophomore year, and I'll tell that story in a minute. But that's the game where Nate Morrow's, I think it's Nate, intercepts the ball and runs it back like 15 yards, and they give the ball back to Alabama. And we got an official apology from the SEC like the next day. I'm like, a lot of good. So I don't know if anybody's chatting in about that game, but I'll have an interesting tidbit about that game. So we have to play without our two best players. We're playing in Birmingham. And so we go down to the goal line and try to score twice, and they don't give us the ball. I mean, we don't get the touchdown. And then we had that interception, and Ronnie Cottrell, who was on the Alabama staff, I was a big Vanderbilt fan. He goes, Edie, Vanderbilt scored, and they didn't call that touchdown. So if anybody's listening that played.
You knew that. He just had to confirm it to you.
Yeah, well, we had to play the refs and Alabama. But yeah, so that, that probably would have saved Woody's job if he had won that game and he had to play without his best players, but it did bring us Bobby Johnson. So I told Bernard I'm a big Bobby Johnson fan.
Silver linings.
Yeah, I have my,
oh,
you see my football?
Oh, that was a great game. I was at that game. I drank more hot chocolate that game than so cool.
Yes, this was the 26 years I waited for a winning season. So my neighbor across the street, I grew up, Bill Polly, he was chairman of the Music City Bowl. He went to Memphis State, but he's a big UK fan, and he's like a dad to me. And so he got this football for me. He had Bobby Johnson sign it, and then I had Coach Kane sign it.
Very cool. Very cool.
I was literally like, couldn't watch the field goal at the end of this game. And I don't know Gary Kimball. Do you know Gary? Gary played football. He went to high school. He's 3 years older than me, but Gary and I were in the first game I've ever watched in a suite. And he played football. He's a professor at Vanderbilt now. We were both but we made the field goal and we won the game. So,
having it had been 25 years or 26 years since we'd been to a bowl game before that one. I could only imagine there being a couple of hundred former players and cheerleaders in the stands that day. I didn't get a chance to attend any of the pregame festivities that were put together, but I would have liked to have seen the names or seen the people from the teams and the cheer squads who were there, because I bet they were tons.
Well, I think there were quite a few, because the night before at the Boundary, they had former players dinner, and John Clark took me with his ex-wife now, but he goes, I'm bringing my wife and my cheerleader. And so I got to go with Johnny, and I don't know if Bernard, you were there, but there was a good number of people.
See, I didn't get to come up that day. I came up the day of the game straight from town.
But that was kind of fun that, Johnny, he wanted me to, have that. And there were a good number of people there. So I imagine at the game, and I know Johnny was at the game, and Gary Kimball. I think Alan Herline maybe was, I don't know.
I'm sure if we went class by class, there's probably representatives from 30 or 40 years. But let's step back from that for just a minute, Edie, because it looks like your grandfather would have cheered Knoxville when General Nealon was in heyday. So how do you convince the family, A, you're going to go to Vanderbilt, B, you're going to cheer for Vanderbilt, and then C, the rest of the family is going to cheer for the black and gold? How did you do that in the family dynamics?
Well, my grandfather passed away when I was in middle school or junior high, that we call. So, my grandmother was my biggest fan. The person there's not a day goes by I don't think about her. And she loved sports, read the sports page. She watched golf all the time. And when I was growing up, I'm like, who watches golf? And now I'm like, I watch golf, even though I don't play golf, you know, kind of for my grandmother. So she, you know, talking to her, she really valued academics. She didn't go to college, but she read the Wall Street Journal every day and all of that. So once that I think my grandmother kind of rooted for Vanderbilt, she kind of just spread through there, you know, and you know, so my freshman year you try out for the JV team and you cheer the home football games. And so, you know, I had, you know, some of my family come there then. And then as, you know, the years go by, it's just, I don't know, of course, part of it, like there were some Tennessee fans that my brother intersected with that nerves. And, you know, that happens in every fan base. A few fans are known for you know, being that way, but I know I'd say some of my dearest friends are from the time in Baton Rouge and in LSU, but I did go to the LSU Vanderbilt game before we moved to Baton Rouge, and the LSU fans sitting behind me gave us a hard time, you know. So but my brother kind of, it was partly experience. I can say when we went to Knoxville, I had oranges thrown at us, you know, some knucklehead, you know, fan, but so of course you come back and tell your family that, you know, you had oranges thrown at you. So
they probably said, was that all that was thrown? Why not whiskey bottles or batter?
no, I don't remember any whiskey bottles.
Yeah.
You know, my sophomore year, it's interesting. We, you know, my senior year of high school, Vanderbilt goes to Music City Bowl. I actually did go to the Tennessee game where Whit Taylor ran and scored in the rain. The guy I kind of dated, he got tickets for me, and he lives in California now. I still like once a year talk to him, and I'm like, thank you for buying those tickets, you know. And you know, that was just a very kind thing because we didn't have season tickets, but I, you know, followed. So I sat in the rain for that game. And so freshman year, there was a lot of expectations and excitement about Vanderbilt. And we had a disappointing season because I think we were hoping to build. And so sophomore year, we start out 4-0, including beating Alabama. So the Alabama game, I don't remember if we fly or drive, but the Alabama had this van that they picked all the cheerleaders up, and they put us in the van and drove us around the University of Alabama and gave us a tour. And like, these are Denny chimes and this is this. And they, of all the universities, like were just very much about branding the University of Alabama and your experience. And they were going to make sure. So I had a really good initial impression of Alabama because of that. And we beat them in Tuscaloosa for their homecoming game. And the fans were so gracious after the game. Now, if we had been Auburn, Bernard, you know this, they wouldn't be so.
That's right. That's right.
But they were first of all in shock. And I did read recently about Bear Bryant coming to speak to Vanderbilt. Have you read that article? Mike McIntyre shared it a couple of years before, where Bear Bryant said, I want to come speak to the Vanderbilt locker room. And, you know, he's like, you have a very fine football team, very well coached. And so they, you know, so we were close, you know, with Coach Mack, but they were just so really, really gracious. And I think that reflects partly on Bear Bryant, you know, like you have to be gracious in winning and losing. And, you know, it took a long time before I understood a lot about Bear Bryant and how they love him so much, and really took care of his own. And, you know, and then that just kind of his thumbprints are on that university in that regard. And
I'd love to see that article. Did you know that Bryant coached at Vanderbilt in the 40s, assistant for a couple of years?
I did. And, you know, that SEC, you know, it goes all the way back to the 1900s. And that's a really interesting, back when Sewanee was in the SEC, and how Coach McGugan and Grantland Rice writing about Vanderbilt that's very interesting. I don't know if that's it's not a 30 for 30, but it's, you know, kind of the
may have been one of those SEC network documentaries. I'll see if I can find it, and if I can, I'll post it. But Edie, clearly you have as much, if not more, football acumen than maybe even many of the players who you were cheering for on the field.
Well,
So
I didn't play, so I
well,
just.
here's my question for you. And I mean no offense to your co-cheerleaders, men or women who are on the squads with you, but I would assume they did not have the football knowledge nearly what you did. So what percentage of your time were you explaining what was going on in the game to your fellow cheerleaders versus you getting to enjoy watching the game or having your responsibilities of being a cheerleader?
We had a pretty smart bunch. I mean, first of all, we had 6 girls, 6 guys. My partner freshman year was a former football player. One of our cheerleaders, my sophomore, junior year, played football at Princeton.
Oh.
So John Friday, he's a principal in Houston.
Mm-hmm.
So, for the most part, we're Vanderbilt. And so I would say more in high school, they didn't know. And honestly, I wanted to be a football cheerleader because I wanted to watch the game. I wanted to be on the sidelines, and that continued, through my Vanderbilt years. And I always thought we could win. I always thought we could beat the team that we were playing. And there'd be like 2 minutes left to go when we were down by 17. And I would still be like, oh, we can pull this out somehow,
Yep.
I kind of got a little more realistic as I got older, but, and then after you've lived in Alabama and Tuscaloosa, like you really see how hard it is for Vanderbilt to compete in the SEC. I mean, it's just, I think it's depth. It's always been depth, offensive line. I have my Jay Cutler bobblehead that my kids make fun of me.
Awesome.
So, Cutler didn't have an offensive line. I mean, he did, but, he didn't have the depth of an offensive line. So
that's always been the history with Vanderbilt. The athleticism is not that different than the front of most of the SEC or most of the opponents. But you're right. It's when you get into the depth, second, third, fourth quarters that always.
When we get, we just fourth quarter when we're tired, especially at that Notre Dame game when the defense played 2 games. But one of my former students, I'm a math teacher, was the center for LSU, T-Bob Hebert, and his dad is Bobby Hebert. So some people might recognize. Do you know Bobby Hebert, Bernard?
Sure.
Yeah. And so, T-Bob wasn't huge, actually. He just had really good technique. So, and I tried to convince T-Bob if he couldn't go to LSU to come to Vanderbilt. And I would be emailing the Vanderbilt coaches, and he would have considered Vanderbilt, but he grew up a Tiger and they wanted him. So that was.
Yeah, he would have been in trouble if he would have gone anywhere else.
Well, I mean, he wanted to go there. His dad and Coach Ogeron were college roommates.
Oh, well, that kind of sealed it right there.
Well, Coach O was at Ole Miss at the time.
Well, Edie, talk to us about, do you have impressions from maybe one of your first year or first games being on the sidelines and fulfilling the one of the dreams that you had as a 5th grader, that you wanted to cheer for the Vanderbilt Commodores? What was it like being on the sidelines?
I mean, it was great. I mean, it really was. It was, I looked back, I moved some stuff in my basement and found my freshman year pictures, and, the stadium's packed. I think it was the night game against Kentucky that I was looking at pictures, and, we really enjoyed it. I mean, I would take it really bad if we lost, but, my cheerleading partner, my junior year, his name's George. He lives out in California. And, he realizes as he got older that people didn't have the college experience that we had. And, we got to travel with the football team. We actually didn't have a coach. I mean, we coached ourselves, and we had like a captain that was in charge. And these days, like for liability, you can't do that. So, we managed ourselves and we held ourselves all accountable. And I mean, of course you deal with, you're together so much, you got personalities. I always say cheerleaders, or you have all these chiefs and not many Indians, and so we all got these personalities, and we think, I don't know if football's like that because you have a head coach and it's more like military, you got to follow command, but here we are. But we had such George was like, we had such a great experience. Like, we got to go to Alabama. We got to have the Alabama representatives take us around. We got to see Denny Chimes. We got to win. We went and played Maryland. My brother worked in Washington, D.C. at the time, and we got to go to the state capitol and tour the state capitol that my brother, got us to do. We actually walked around Georgetown and saw their little bitty football stadium, which I was really surprised, like, because Georgetown's such a big school. So we got to do all that. The first football game varsity that I went to, and we got on those buses and we got the police escort to the airport. I was like just flabbergasted. I was like the kid that had just been to New York City for the first time. I was like,
right.
I was like, oh my goodness. And I come back and I tell Al McKinney, he's this basketball player, about it, and goes, first game, huh, Edie? But I tell you, Coach Kramer, he was athletic director, and we were all scared of him pretty much. I mean, he stood on that plane and he was like, cheerleaders here. And we just like got on there, sat down.
Fell in line quickly.
We were not going to be, we were low maintenance. We got on that plane, and I was also on the plane that tipped going out to Iowa. Do you know that story?
I've heard that story, but before you tell us that story, I wanted to share with you, Coach Kramer's in his 90s and he's still making national headlines as recently as this week. And I posted it in the Facebook group that he expects some version of college football to take place this fall, as we all hope it does.
Yeah. Well, we owe a lot to Coach Kramer for the SEC. I mean, a lot. I think history will be very kind to him and what he did for the SEC.
Such a leader. When he
definitely is a leader. And his wife,
mm-hmm.
Hoot, I think she's passed away, right? Because his wife,
I don't know.
She would come knock on our doors and she'd be like, I have this cheer. And she was like COMMODORES. Like she had this like thing. And when I write out Commodores, I still hear her voice saying that.
Oh, wow.
Really. She wanted us to do these certain cheers. And, he was all business, gruff. I mean, he wasn't unfriendly, but I mean, he was so managed. Like, he reminds me of Coach Corbin. Coach Corbin, they practice how they stand for the national anthem, baseball team. And Coach Kramer, he got us on he cared. He didn't just go in his seat and get in his newspaper. I mean, he was even putting the cheerleaders where they were. And, we dressed up like it was a business trip.
Right.
I look back at those pictures from Magoogan, and we were like, we took it like a business trip. So, it was, I would say, like, we very much like knew what was going on in football and basketball. I think if it was a baseball cheerleaders, that would be more up, like you'd have to explain a lot. But I think for the most part, people basically understood, all the rules of football and basketball. But football was my love. We had better success in basketball, but I think just when I look back, there's nothing like, an autumn, fall, crisp night football game, in the SEC. I mean, what more can you ask for? And, you got your band and your cheerleaders, and, the band and the cheerleaders add so much to the game, and as my husband's been a coach, I'm always like, make sure you appreciate those cheerleaders, make sure you appreciate the band. And I'm gonna tell you, I went to some Vanderbilt football games this year, and I'm like, thank goodness we have the cheerleaders in the band, because they helped. And it was a rough go this year, a little bit. So, the football games were particularly fun. It's always hard when we play Tennessee and the students are gone for Thanksgiving. That puts us, I wish we'd move the game up a little bit, but I can't hear you.
Sorry, I'm on mute. Makes it for a very orange stadium, and I don't like that. But I do want to share a Coach Kramer story with you real quick. Speaking of the Tennessee week, we were always, because it was Thanksgiving weekend, the football team had to stay there and practice and prepare for the game. And so one Thanksgiving, we're all on campus and we all get together in one of the cafeterias, and Coach Kramer walks around, and he had no reason to really need to speak with me other times, but he walked up to me, put his hand on my shoulder, and he says, Nomberg, you're a quarterback, so you're going to carve one of the turkeys. I had never had any experience doing that, and I have no clue why, just because I played quarterback, I would have any better than.
But you're like, yes, sir.
But I got up immediately and washed my hands and immediately went over and started doing what I thought would be the right thing. But that was just Coach Kramer, being a leader, telling you what to do, and you went and did it.
Yeah.
Well, talk to us a little bit about cheering in Memorial for the Bomb Squad and some of those experiences, because they had some wonderful teams and great endings to games. I've recently have interviewed Barry Goheen. I read his book.
Yeah.
Oh, just phenomenal trip down memory lane.
I need to read Barry's book. Yeah.
Oh, you would love it. You'd probably read it in one sitting. I promise you, it's so great.
Yeah. I've seen some ads like in Facebook. It's like you mention something and then you get this ad in Facebook, which kind
of weird. It's so weird.
Like, how does Facebook know that
it knows?
Would want to buy a Barry Goheen book?
Right.
Yeah. So, my freshman year, I'm almost sure it's my freshman year, we were playing Tennessee freshman year. We're down by 9 this is without the 3-pointer. Mm-hmm. And less than a minute to go, and we come back and beat Tennessee in Memorial Gym. And, I had a poster that had, the clips down and Phil Cox making these shots. And so it was that game. I think, we cheered my freshman year for the girls because I was on junior varsity. And then when you got to varsity cheerleading, you cheered for the varsity the boys. My senior year, we beat Indiana and they won the national championship.
Steve Alford, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, Steve Alford was playing on that team. And, we beat, I was at a Georgia game after I graduated and watched Barry Goheen make a half-court shot. And I was on the side where I could see from the half-court. He made one at halftime, and, he
end of the game.
He beat, now this wasn't in Memorial Gym, but we beat University of Pittsburgh with overtime and went on to the Sweet 16 thanks to his shots. He had ice water in his veins.
That's probably one of the top 5 games in Vanderbilt basketball history. And he makes
the Pitt game.
The Pitt game. It was on TV. If you go to YouTube, you'll find it very easily. But very meticulously goes over a lot of detail from both of, or really all of these games you're describing right now in his book.
Yeah. So I know he's from Kentucky.
Mm-hmm. He lives in Atlanta now, but he was from a small.
Yeah, I know he lives in Atlanta. So we lived in Murray, Kentucky, in the county next to us. I think he's from Marshall County.
I think that's right, if I remember correctly. Yeah.
Yeah. So having lived there, they like their basketball, very much, and just like Alabama likes their football. So, born and bred and all that. So those games, I'm trying to think. Will Purdue was in my class at Vanderbilt, and I remember he sat out in Branscombe, and freshman year, if you had told me he'd go on to play for the Chicago Bulls, and in fact, I had a friend that went overseas to play basketball, and this is before we had social media and all the internet. And came back from playing in Switzerland and came back, and I told him that Will had made SEC Player of the Year, right? And he didn't believe me. And I'm like, no, really, he did. So, Will's position coach, I'm blanking on his name. He coached at Tennessee State and then came to Vanderbilt.
Ed Martin. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so Coach Martin gets a lot of credit for that. Mm-hmm. Coach Bostic actually was in Tuscaloosa when we lived in Tuscaloosa. He was Coach Newton's #1 assistant. And so after the Alabama games, I'd see Coach Bostic and we'd talk about Vanderbilt and basketball. And
Barry shares some very personal and poignant stories about Coach Bostic and Coach Newton, of course. But I want to share with you a fun Will Purdue story that I have. in the summer, most of the athletes would stay around campus, take classes and train or rehab, whatever their situation was. Well, several of the basketball players who were on campus and several football players combined for a summer league softball team. So where do you put a man who's taller than 7 feet and plays on your softball team? Well, you put him at first base, of course. I had the benefit and the luxury of playing second base for that team that summer. Needless to say, I didn't have to travel to my left very often for any reason whatsoever. Will covered so much territory. I really played over towards second base up the middle just because I've never had a 7-foot plus first baseman, and it really was just awesome to be on that side of the field. I wonder, I doubt he remembers this, but it was just so much fun.
Well, his feet are what, 23?
At least. Dwayne, who's on here with us, may know, or maybe JJ knows, but just some fun.
Well, I have my Vanderbilt yearbook.
Oh, there you go.
I have some pictures of Will. Yeah, so it's got his feet in here. Football. There's Coach Brown.
Yeah.
They have, I just happened to find this the other day. I was looking for something. There is, I don't know if I can find it real quickly, but it has like a section, the feats of Will Purdue. And it has
FEET and the FEAT, I'm sure.
Yeah. So I'll see if I can find it. I would think it'd be after football. There's football. But Will's feet are like 3?
Dwayne says 22s.
22s,
yeah,
okay.
Mrs. Kramer passed away. Sarah Joe passed away a few years ago. Thank you, JJ and Dwayne, for updating us about that. Edie, let me ask you this. You've over the years, you've been such a great supporter. You go to the games, basketball, football, baseball, but you've also had a next generation in the family to be part of the Vanderbilt family. Can you, from that perspective, while many things have changed over the decades, a lot of things stayed the same. And I'm wondering if you can kind of share with us your experience from your perspective, some of those observations. It's even though we're in the SEC, the biggest, best, baddest conference, there's still certain aspects of Vanderbilt being such a small school, and so many people that way. Even for those of us who don't live in the Nashville area, it's still such an intimate family to me. And maybe I read that wrong, but that's just my experience.
Well, it is, and I think the best people I know, the finest people I know, are from my Vanderbilt years. I think I went to public school, and I come to Vanderbilt, I didn't know about the honor code. We go through the honor code, and I remember like they went over plagiarism, and then they had these black, wall with white letters in this presentation. Ignorance is not an excuse.
Right.
And so the sense of honor, being honorable. And I think that's still very true of Vanderbilt. I'm very proud of the progress Vanderbilt's made on race relations. I help with the sorority at Vanderbilt, and it's very integrated. It is not an issue. There's lots of people of color there, and I think your experience as a person of color is so much better. I'm sure the African-American football players, had their team, but it was still, challenging for some of them. And so I think a lot of that for the better has changed at Vanderbilt. And my daughter graduated in 2017. And I'm very proud of the work Vanderbilt's done on that. And I have 2 of my students that are going to Vanderbilt. One of them is a relative of Thurgood Marshall. And I told him, I'm like, you put that down right on your Vanderbilt application that you're related to Thurgood Marshall. And he picked Vanderbilt to go to. And then I had my top I teach calculus, my top calculus student, his name's Caleb, and he picked Vanderbilt. And all year I was like, I hope you go to Vanderbilt. But I knew he was going to have lots of options. He's quiet. He played football. I actually messaged Coach Mason. I'm like, he might be someone good, like to be a manager or have around, but, so, I knew to recommend Vanderbilt for those kids, that socially it was going to be very good. And I think it was socially good, but I think, the Vanderbilt of 1987 versus today is much more inclusive and progressive. And to me, that's a plus. And I think that's really good. And I have this girl, Nia, that I met. Her boyfriend at the time played basketball, and her reunion lines up with ours. And so when I go to my reunion, I go, she's like 30 years younger than me, and I find Nia. And last time I saw her, she came running up to me. She ran track at Vanderbilt, and she had all these Vanderbilt football players. And I wish I could remember the name of these guys. And this guy, we should put him on an ad about how much he loved Vanderbilt, how great he was a running back. And she graduated probably 2009. And he's like, the people I love in the world are my family and my Vanderbilt brothers, and just how great his experience was at Vanderbilt. And I think, we talked about David Price, that David speaks so highly of Vanderbilt. I'm like, just put those people on for our ads. So, I think Vanderbilt is still a great institution, like when we were there. And I think a lot of us feel, y'all were football players, but we wouldn't get in Vanderbilt today because it's so hard to get into.
Oh my gosh.
Feel like it. But whether that's the case or not, it was always highly regarded. And my daughter lives in New York City, the one that graduated. Interesting is she graduated with an HOD major, and the perception is that that's what all the football players take, they're HOD majors. She didn't have football players in her classes. I mean, she had a couple of basketball players. And if you look at what they're majoring in, I mean, they're economics and basically HOD's business psychology, just now started a business degree. She went to some football games. I was always like, why are you not going? I had to, when we played Texas A&M, I made her come to the game. I'm like, this is your senior year. You've got to come. So, Vanderbilt is very social, and they show up late. I mean, their social life revolves around, let's have, this party before the game. And then,
Sure.
just like when we were there, they don't all get there,
It's
but
been that way for decades.
yeah, I mean, it's somewhat true at other SEC schools. I mean, I've seen Alabama and LSU, but I think Vanderbilt's made a lot of progress in a lot of areas, I think, especially race relations. And I think that that's really good. I mean, we just named an African-American athletic director, and we had one before. And, I saw the documentary Strong Inside about Terry Wallace's experience. And, Vanderbilt did not whitewash it. They said, they stood up for what they did wrong and said, we are sorry. And the chancellor had the best intentions, but didn't know how hard it was going to be for Perry Wallace to be the first African-American in the SEC. And he gives his senior year a real honest accounting. And a lot of people don't like what he said. And, they thought they had embraced him, and it was hard for him in a lot of ways. And it took a long time before we made that right, and thank goodness we made it right, and we retired his jersey. And when you listen to some of the audio of some of the places he had to go, I mean, it's just heartbreaking. Yeah. And, so we're making progress every year on that. And I think Vanderbilt now is a pace setter. Like, we're not looking to other schools.
I was just going to say, I think that
we are the standard. We are the pace setter. We are the school that has the happiest people, the happiest students.
Yeah.
And so my daughter has very close friends, a group of girlfriends that she had. And I think you can come from all over the country and assimilate into Vanderbilt. You can come from a small Kentucky town, or Los Angeles, or Baltimore, Birmingham. It's becoming less and less Southern, but that doesn't mean they don't embrace Southern people. I mean, it is still Southern, but it's not as, you know what I mean? It's,
I do. It's much more metropolitan as Nashville has just exploded in the last 20 years.
yes.
I do want to welcome Kenny Cole and maybe some others who may have gotten by me or in. I do want to give a shout out to Andrew Marinus and what a fantastic book he wrote on Perry Wallace. I interviewed Taylor Stokes several weeks ago when we started this series, and he shares he was just a few years behind that time period, late 60s, early 70s, and shares some similar experiences on and off the field. Edie, I could talk with you for hours about this stuff. We're getting to the end of our chat, and
Well, I just think we should be very proud of Vanderbilt, how intentional they've been, not just, it's diversity, not just race diversity, socioeconomic diversity, religious diversity, and I think that makes Vanderbilt better and stronger. They're like, whatever need you qualify for, Vanderbilt gave, and that's what they gave for us, for my daughter. Vanderbilt cost us less than her school, St. Andrew's Episcopal in Jackson, Mississippi.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm very grateful that she got a scholarship. She got a scholarship through Peabody, for merit, just a small one, but it was mostly need-based aid. And so if you get in Vanderbilt, they will figure out how to get you through without you going into, in theory, debt. She still came with some debt, but
well, I was going to say, you don't want to write the retail check these days to go to school at Vanderbilt. It's the cost of higher education has just exploded.
I would say it's worth every penny.
It certainly, I'm so proud of my school and all of the things that you have so eloquently described from your experiences and from your perspective. So I want to thank you for sharing this hour with us this evening on another Conversations with Commodores with Edie Johnston Kelsey. So thank you.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, guys, I hope y'all are being safe and being patient with this pandemic. We're going to come through it. We're going to be I know that even in the South, we're starting to open up society even more and more. I saw where the governor in Alabama, effective tomorrow, has amended the safer at home, but do the right thing for you and your family. Hopefully we'll be at either watching on TV or maybe somehow at college football this fall. But thank you again for joining us, and anchor down.